In recent years, the UK private rental market has seen a surge in demand, with average prices rising over 40%. Yet, understandably, it's the least favoured form of housing tenure, with many renters paying an increasingly unaffordable share of their income on rent. The crisis costs the government £27 billion a year in housing benefit, leads to inequality, and intensifies the cost of living crisis, especially for the younger generation rent. Now, with house prices forecast to fall in 2023, what are the prospects for renters? Will rents also follow suit and fall, or will they continue to rise? In the last house price fall of 2008, rents did fall by a small amount. But after a 10% rise in 2022, Savills forecast rent will continue to rise 18% from 2023 to 2027. So no matter what happens to house prices, rents are almost certainly going up. How did we get into this state? Well, firstly, since the 1980s, the right to buy scheme promoted by Margaret Thatcher has led to the sale of many council houses, but with no corresponding increase in supply. Understandably, it's popular with former tenants who can buy at a discounted price, but the consequence has been a fall in the availability of social housing, with councils often having to rent back their former properties to let out. 40% of former council houses are now in the private rented sector, and the waiting list for council housing is so acute it is a real crisis. Back in 1980, the average working age family spent 12% of its income on housing. Today it is nearly 3 times that, at 32%, with private renters in London spending on average 42% of income. Research from the ONS show that for low income renters living in high price areas, the proportion can rise to 62% of income. With the government not investing in building houses, the bulk of home building is now left to the private sector. But there are several reasons why insufficient homes are being built. This includes lack of available land, barriers and delays in the planning system, and increasingly skill shortages in the construction sector. Now, the government have a commitment to build 300,000 homes a year to meet the growth in demand and the current backlog. Experts say this target is really a bare minimum, but in reality, there is little, if any, hope of getting anywhere close to the target. There is a fundamental political conflict between the wish to increase the housing stock, but local opposition to new housing developments. And this is highlighted by the likely backbench revolt against government planning laws which set councils compulsory building targets. If targets become advisory rather than mandatory, supply of new homes will definitely fall. MPs talk of the need to build houses, but at the same time are aware of local pressures which oppose building homes in their own constituencies. Now, given the deadlock in building sufficient homes and the unaffordability of housing, the government sought to support first-time buyers with the Help to Buy scheme, a government-backed mortgage loan scheme enabling more to buy. But this is a classic example of dealing with a symptom rather than the underlying cause. It has merely inflated demand to buy and pushed up prices. A recent Parliament report stated this scheme cost £29 billion, but they found it does not provide good value for money. It's merely inflated prices more than its subsidy value, and it would have been better spent on building new homes. I think also it reflects the political influence of homeowners versus renters. When mortgage costs soared in September, there was an outcry from papers and the political establishment. Even the legendary Martin Lewis argued the government should start supporting mortgage payers. Now, at this point, renters may throw their hands in the air saying we've had a permanent crisis for many years, because research from Halifax found that the cost of renting is higher than for home owners, even with maintenance costs included. And of course, there is not the inconsiderable fact that homeowners have a prospect of rent-free retirement, and the need for retired renters to continue paying market rents is a future crisis in the making. So why is renting getting even more expensive, despite the fact so few people can afford to pay? The population of the UK is forecast to rise by 72 million by 2043. However, the growth in single-person households mean the number of households will rise at a faster rate. There'll be 3.7 million more households in the next 25 years. From 2008 to 2025, there's been a 58% increase. This is despite young people living with their parents for longer. And 64% of this future growth will be persons aged over 75 years. One significant cause of the growth in the UK population has been driven by net migration, which reached a record level of 500,000 last year. Despite Brexit, which has reduced migration from Europe, it has been compensated by migration from non-EU countries because the UK needs to fill labour shortages and also attract foreign students who pay higher fees. Now, whilst buying a home is a common aspiration in the UK, many young people saddled with student loans and falling real wages have no option of saving for a typical deposit of £59,000. Record house price to earnings ratios do matter for first-time buyers who simply can't save that much from deposit or get a mortgage without their parents' help. Between 2004 and 2017, only 9% of people under 30 whose parents did not own a house were able to get on the property ladder. This figure was 25% for those parents who did own. But overall, home ownership for young people has fallen very considerably, leaving them no option but the private rented sector. Now, whilst demand is rising, the supply of private rented accommodation is not keeping up. There's a general difficulty in building homes we've already mentioned, but also other factors have worsened the shortage. Landlords are increasingly finding Airbnb listings to be more profitable. Listings on Airbnb rose from 76,000 in 2016 to over 250,000 in January 2020. And this rise is mainly in areas where homes are most unaffordable. A recent Parliament report also highlighted the concern that as older private landlords leave the market, they are not being replaced by new landlords. And it's worth mentioning here that there are nearly 500,000 empty homes in the UK, which could provide a partial solution to some of the issues. Now, wouldn't falling house prices put downward pressure on rents? Around the world, falling house prices can lead to lower rents, but this is unlikely in the UK because of a fundamental shortage of private rented accommodation. And as interest rates rise, many landlords will try to push their higher costs onto their tenants. And because of their market power, tenants will have no option but to pay. And even if house prices do fall a bit, which is quite likely, it is unlikely to enable many to make the switch from renting to buying, as prices will frankly still remain quite expensive. It's not just prices that are a concern. In 2020, 23% of private rented homes did not meet the decent homes criteria. Some 7% of private renters live in overcrowded conditions, compared to 1% of owner-occupiers. And this cost of badly maintained properties was highlighted recently by the death of 2-year-old Iwab Ishak, who died partly from high mould exposure. Now, there is some hope that schemes such as Build to Rent will help. These are specific builds for long-term rent, and it represented 20% of London's new housing supply in 2020. The British Property Federation predict the development of 200,000 homes due to this scheme in the next 2 years. So this is welcome but still only part of the picture, with the rented sector still facing large squeezes. The problem is that the very grim economic outlook of the next few years will do nothing to solve the fundamental housing crisis and may even constrain house building further. Economic uncertainty, rising costs and planning regulations will make it hard to increase supply. Also, renters are not a political priority. Despite the crisis in affordability, the government have often pursued other objectives, such as prioritising a pension triple lock guarantee rather than, say, public sector pay or state benefits. The result in the past 10 years has been a net gain for pensioners compared to young people, despite young people suffering more from renting costs. Unfortunately, there are no easy solutions to the crisis in the rented market. There are serious structural and political problems which have proved quite difficult to solve, yet it is genuinely one of the most pressing issues facing the UK, with a wide impact on the economy. It will need greater political will to increase supply and give more priority to young renters. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I will have lots more great videos coming soon. Thank you.